All right, getting this thing started. Here we go. With the house cleaning out the way, let's set the table for our esteemed guest today. Shortbox Nation, join me in welcoming a man who has brought authentic, high-flying Luche Libre action to comic shops all over the U.S. Let's go ahead and give it up for Jay Gonzo. What's up, Jay? How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well, man. How you doing today?
I am well, dude. I am well. I'm so glad that we could link up after our initial Heroes Con meeting and whatnot. Hopefully the rest of your I know it's like been months now since Heroes Con. I'm sure listeners right now are like, dude, get the fuck over Heroes Con, for goodness sake. But hopefully your Heroes Con ended on a high note. It was a pleasure meeting there and all that. How'd it go for you?
It was great, man. It was right back on track. Heroes always one of my better shows. This is probably, I think, maybe possibly within a couple $100 of being my best show ever sales wise, but it was just good to see everybody. I mean, it was, the crowd was out. I think taking 2 years off definitely. Heroes is a special crowd. Like the people who go to Heroes kind of go for a specific, like to engage in comic as an art form and not just the commerce or spectacle of comics. It's and to kind of that level of love for the art form to be kind of denied a convention for 2 years and then to have it happen. Everyone was kind of like, just there were a lot of hugs were given out, which is probably like why so much COVID swept through that place. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, so the show was great. Go ahead.
You could feel the love and the COVID. You can feel the love and the COVID.
I mean, I felt both. Yeah, I caught COVID there. Definitely drove back 30 hours with COVID, which was unfun, but still
rough,
worth it,
man.
Honestly, man, if someone told me, hey, dude, we're going to do Heroes again next year, you're absolutely going to get COVID at the same level you had it. You're going to have to drive home with COVID again. I'm like, all right, let's do it. I'd do it all over again, man. It was totally worth it. But I enjoyed being there.
That's dedication. That's dedication, and I'm glad. That it looked like you're covered just fine. It looked like you're doing well. Yeah. I told you I was gonna tell you this. So now that we've officially started, I definitely want to go ahead and highlight that. The reason why you are here is because I stopped by your booth, captivated by. I think you had a one of those tall ass banners. It had La Mano on there. The colors were vibrant. Your table was like appealing. You were friendly. All that great energy to you. And the reason why you're here is because I picked up Mano Del Destino in trade paperback form. I know some of our listeners have already heard me champion this. I'm so glad I picked up this trade in particular. You had the single issues for sale. I think you had a smaller trade paperback that Image put out. And then you had this one that on one side is English and the other side is Spanish. And I said that when I finished the English side, I was going to try practicing, learning some new Spanish by flipping through the other side. But a big reason why I'm happy I purchased this is because the back material, the back matter, is awesome. You made this so worth the price point, and the price point was super reasonable if I remember right. But you've got so many cool graphics, so many backstory. You've got like a few write-ups in the back. And for our listeners, I'll have a link to purchase it from Image in the show notes for our video folks watching on YouTube. You're looking at me hold it right now. It's gorgeous. It is so gorgeous, and I highly recommend checking that out. But where was I going to go? But I wanted to know, did you end up selling out of all of these? Because I know this Spanish and English version was a special version that you collected.
Yeah. So that was the Kickstarter version, and I have a few of my overages that I've been taking around. I'm getting low, like on that version of it, and I think I don't know where Image is at. I need to check on that as well. So we're kind of coming on the this is running its course. Like we're getting toward the end of the trade paperback, and I should say too that the Image version has everything that's in English in the Kickstarter version is in the Image version. Mm-hmm. It's just the version you have, the Kickstarter version, the kind of deluxe version. It's slightly oversized, so it's 7x11. It's a little bigger than a regular comic book. It's on newsprint. It's got the edge printing, and then it also has the Spanish, in addition to it. It's not to say that the Image version is diminished to any degree, but it is kind of like standard. It's just kind of like it's on Image's regular paper, it's Image's regular size, but it does have all of that back matter that you were talking about. And that was important to me. Is like, if you're going to put back matter in a comic, I'm just kind of overseeing people just like having the script in there, which is such a bullshit kind of inclusion. And so it's like, here's the comic without the good parts. Yeah. We'll just, run it, So, I really wanted to if I'm gonna, a lot of people double dip, right? So a lot of the people who have bought the issues are gonna buy the trade paperback, and I just wanted to give them kind of value added, like stuff that you're not gonna get if you bought the issues. And also, I just wanted the stuff that I enjoy when I read back matter, like stuff that like I've enjoyed in other people's back matter. Like, this is cool. Like, I should do this when I do that. And I also kind of like recap a lot of the conversations I end up having with people at conventions and stuff. Like, if someone's gonna like, and especially now that like there's an image version of it, there's a lot of people who are gonna engage with the comic that aren't gonna get it from me personally, which is kind of a new point in my career. Like I up until like a couple years ago, almost everyone who has La Mano, it like got it from me. Usually got it from me personally, or like a store that I that I'm friendly with or whatever. So with the image version being out in the world, it's like now it's a whole audience of people who are going to have the comic who are not going to meet me, who might not. So I want to at least have the conversations that I have with people who bought the issues at conventions or have bought them for me personally. I want to at least kind of have an opportunity for me to have the same conversations and express the same ideas that with them that wouldn't since they can't get it from me personally. And man, again, it's like, if you're gonna ask somebody for $25 or what, or 50 for the larger ones, like I want to make sure that they walk away from it going like, yeah, that was worth the money. Like, I don't want anybody to be like, that kind of was bullshit. So I just really wanted to give people some bang for their buck, and it's all just elbow grease for me. It's just spending time with the keyboard, making sure it all happened.
Well, look, mission accomplished. I'll tell you
thanks,
that
man.
much. I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I didn't go the cheap route, and I went and splurged a little bit because it's a beautiful book. And like I said, I'll have the image version, a link to buy that in the show notes. I've seen it on the image site for sale. So if you're interested, you can do that. But Gonzo, I want to take a step back, man, and let's talk about your origin story. Every great comic book, especially superheroes, have awesome origin stories, right? So I understand that you were born and raised in Cypress, California. You now reside in Arizona. What are some of the distinct, I guess, differences between the two places culturally speaking? And then I want to know, what's the comic scene like in Arizona?
Oh man, like culturally, I don't, so I grew up. Cypress is kind of on it's on the edge of LA County, right? So like Cypress is like the ass end of Orange County. Like it technically is Orange County, but it's not like whatever you're thinking about. Like all the shit they put on TV about Orange County is nowhere near where I grew up. Like I literally, when I rode my bike, like I went to the High School of the Arts, and when I would ride my bike to the High School of the Arts, I literally was on the riding on the border. Like I could look to the right and there's LA County, and then to the left is Orange County. So, but being where it is, it's a little more diverse, like LA's a lot of kind of small little villages of like cultures, like you can be in the Mexican part of town, you can, be in the Vietnamese part of town, or you can be, and that that's all, and they're very kind of compartmentalized. At least LA can be, at least LA County, and especially like the neighborhoods in LA. But Orange County was a little more like just mixed, like some of my best friends growing up were like Filipino or Vietnamese, and then, like I'm just a Mexican kid hanging out with them, and there's like some white kids hanging out there too. It's not like I think but it is an area that is extremely diverse, and so getting into things like manga very early, like I'm talking like 81, 82, like just there just happened to be a Japanese toy store and it had like manga there, and like I love comics, so like hey, let's check this out. So I got I was on I was excited to see like Robotech happen, because I had seen like Macross stuff, years before Robotech ever hit the airwaves and stuff like that. So, and it was a really good place to kind of, not be hung up on kind of like your ethnicity, I guess, to some degree, and kind of, and also, intellectually, like I know I'm a minority, but like I really live, both in Arizona and California. Like I live a lot amongst a lot of Latinos, so it's not until I really venture out into like other parts of the country, I'm like, oh yeah, I am a minority, So, but it was kind of cool to like be able to grow up that way. It was, I didn't have to feel otherized or exoticized either. You know what I mean? Like, because also, there's a lot of Mexicans in the world, especially in where I live. So it's not like, I'm not like some like from Sri Lanka or something where like people are like, oh, my exotic friend. It was just, it all seemed very kind of like
normal,
like mixed together in a way that was fairly natural. And it wasn't until kind of like, much later in life that I can see how kind of compartmentalized things could be, and then most of my life happened Even though I grew up in Cyprus, like most of my family lived in like Montebello, Pico Rivera. So like I was heading into East Los, like a lot of the time for like my childhood. A lot of my childhood was kind of spent there. And, it just kind of, I knew that I always knew kind of intellectually like that there was, or I guess not, but I knew like maybe emotionally, like on a visceral level, that there was this kind of like culture that was of my kind of grandparents and aunts and uncles kind of generation that I was from, but wasn't necessarily steeped in completely, that I could kind of, I could kind of like, dip into this world of like, of Chicano culture, and then also live in the kind of, freedom of not having like the rigid, like not being like, dogmatic about that culture. Right. It was just kind of something I could enjoy as much as I wanted to, and then kind of live as free as I wanted to in Cyprus. I guess it was very freeing. It's probably there wasn't a lot of like, because it was so mixed, there wasn't a lot of like social constraints put on you, like it was kind of free to do whatever. And it was like, the 70s and 80s in California, it was ideal. Like it was great. I was, 6 miles from the beach, I could be there in 20 minutes on my bike if I really hustled. So, I mean, and that wasn't lost on me as a kid. Like I realized how idyllic it was.
So during your upbringing, like, did you have access to comic books growing up, or do you remember your first conscious exposure to like a comic book?
So that's a funny, like, LA Orange County kind of difference. One of the actually does lead to comics. Like, so I was a big Spider-Man fan. Like I just loved Spider-Man as a kid, and the Orange County Register, which is a newspaper out there, did not carry the Spider-Man newspaper strip, but the LA Times does. And so whenever I would go to my grandparents' house, I would want to read the newspaper because it had the Spider-Man strip in there. And then my dad's father started cutting them out for me. And so I would, like, if we took a month or two off, I would go there and there'd just be a stack of Spider-Man strips for me. And I realized that's the worst version of Spider-Man to like be your first exposure. But it was I just love the art style. And so I fell even more in love with like kind of the comic art form. And then also at my grandparents' house, I remember because I like the Spider-Man thing, the newspaper strip, my grandfather bought me this set of Marvel stamps. They were like a little stamp pad, little like maybe 1x2 stamps. And I've since found them on eBay. It was exactly, exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, it was like the late 77, 78, somewhere around there. They had these like set of stamp pads, and then it came with a Thor stamp pad or art pad to stamp them on. And I just remember looking at the Silver Surfer specifically, and just how simple it was, but how powerful it was, and that fascinated me. And then, but the bodegas that I would go to in like Montebello and Pico, my nana and I would like walk to this bodega up the road from her house. They didn't have any American comic books. They just had like Luche Libre stuff. And so that kind of began my love for like Luche Libre. I didn't buy any comics there because my Spanish is kind of terrible. So I couldn't read them, but I would look through them when I was there. But it was in Cyprus and back in the Orange County side of that where I first discovered like a spinner rack. Like at a 7-Eleven, my buddy Arthur, we were just hanging out one day, probably like 9 or 10 years old. And he's just like, hey, I got to go buy my new comics. I'm like, like comic books, fuck, they still make those, like, and so, we go to 7-Eleven and like he bought like a GI Joe, I think issue 12 or 13, and I bought one too just because it like looked cool, and then just like looking through that comic, and it was all an art style I really appreciated, because Spider-Man was very different than all the art style in the comic section of the newspaper. It was just that kind of like Marvel house style, that kind of like Kirby, Romita-esque kind of house style, and so then
wasn't it Larry Lieber that did the artwork for that, right? That was like Stan and his brother doing.
Oh, for the GI Joes that early? Oh, the strips. God, I don't know. I think it might have been. Yeah. I think it might have been Larry. I think you're. Honestly, I'd have to dig. It's on the other side of the shelves I'm sitting on here. I do have a collection of the strips now.
Actually, I see that. So it was Larry Lieber did some, and then of course John Romita. So yeah. So you're on point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then Romita kind of like he was the art director at Marvel for the longest time, and so he kind of policed the house style that was Marvel from like the 60s into the 70s and 80s. And even the GI Joe stuff that was coming out. So when I saw the comic, I was just like in love, and then I instantly like went back the next day and I just bought everything Marvel. I bought, I think, and this is like 84, 85. It's like 85, and so like my first Thor I buy is just a Simonson Thor because he's just on the book, and I'm buying Frank Miller Daredevils because Miller's drawing Daredevil, and just like it's just this this golden age. Like I start becoming a collector of comics in like mid '85, and so that mythic 1986 like Watchmen happens, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, like all of that's just what was happening. And the first day I went to a comic shop was the day that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 came out. The second issue had come out. And it's just a thing like, oh, indie comics, I'll check these out. Just bought it, for, I don't know, $1.25 or whatever it was, like not for no money at all. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just the stuff, it's not until, 20 years later that you look back and you're like, holy crap, like all these like epic creators were just doing stuff while I was, just,
yeah,
it was just what was out. So, yeah, I mean, it was, a little bit of Spider-Man and a little bit of G.I. Joe that really kind of made me a comic fan. Like it was that first G.I. Joe issue, but I think it was the X-Men stuff. Like my first X-Men issue is like 203, something like that. Like there's they were doing all the solo stories. It was just after the trial of Magneto, and because I've gone back and read some of those, but I read a solo Nightcrawler story. Was like the first X-Men comic I bought. It followed shortly by, within a month or two, is X-Men 205, which is Barry Windsor Smith drawing Wolverine in the snow fighting the Reavers and Lady Deathstrike, which is one of the best all-time uncanny issues that's ever come out. And it was just like the third X-Men comic I bought because it was what was out that month, and I bought it at like Thrifties or something. Like it wasn't even 7-Eleven. So
yeah,
but,
Your ability to recall all of these storylines is mad impressive, and you got me. Everyone tuning in right now is like, "Oh, Badr's getting a Marvel boner right now." Hearing Gonzo talk about all this, I want to go ahead and maybe excite you in the sense of, you brought up the stamps and how they had a big impact. They are coming out with a Marvel Value Stamps, a visual history hardcover book next year in February. It's on Amazon right now, and I'm kind of flipping through some of the previews.
Now, those are
I think it includes.
Those are the rubber stamps that you like ink up and stuff, like those stamps. Like, 'cause those are the stamps I'm talking about.
I think it includes like every single, I guess, like campaign, like stamp campaign they ever came out with. So readers can cut out that. So it's got like all 100 superhero supervillain stamps. So the first
they
and
did the
second
stamps like stamps like you would put on a like on an envelope, right? Like you would like those kind of stamps, like you buy at the post office. They did those for a while, but I'm talking about like rubber stamps, like you would like take an ink pad and you ink it up.
You know what?
So those are the ones. Those are the ones
surprised.
that like you can. I found them on eBay not that long ago, and they're not a whole lot of money, but I just was like, do I really want to?
Yeah.
Do I need these? But I have since. So in my, as every comic collector does, you're like, I've sold like all my issues before and got rid of comics, blah blah blah.
Same.
But real recently, I've just gone back and I've started buying back all the stuff that was important to me. And none of it's like particularly like valuable, but I loved it as a kid, so I'm like, I want to make sure I have all of this and all of that, and I think one of those things is going to be those stamps. I'm gonna try to hunt some down and get that stamp kit. Just
do it.
Dude. It's like 1977, 78, somewhere around there when I first saw those.
Dude, do it and just start. Do it and actually use those stamps. Like just
for sure. Yeah.
Go back old school and just start sending snail mail to people with them stamps. That'd be rad. So, what were you piqued my interest when you mentioned Luche Libre comics, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Luche Libre. But what were Luche Libre comic books like? Like, was there one company in particular putting them out? Like, who were some of the artists, or was there any like American artists or writers doing those?
Well, the ones that I saw were still an extension of this guy named Jorge Cruz, who did El Santo comics in the '60s, and I can speak on this, but there's better sources for it. There's actually a guy named Keith Rainville who's written a lot. He's got a website. I don't remember what his website's called now, but he does like a blog site. It's really insightful. And he's where I get most of my information on this. I remember seeing these as a kid, and then after the fact, he's put context to them. So what they would do is they would get wrestlers, one of which being like El Santo was like the kind of biggest cash cow, and they would have these wrestlers go into a studio and just take like, I don't know, a few hundred pics in different poses and like, photographs of them. And then the wrestler would like go about his day. And then they would have artists take those photos and like like remove all the background elements, and they would take like the photo, and then they would draw in the rest of what was happening. And so it's not quite fumetti because it's not photo like the Italians do, like the fumetti, which is just all
like
all photography collage work. Yeah, exactly. But so there is an artistry to it, and so they would just have these fantastical stories. And there's actually, God, they were doing at one point, El Santo is selling like 3 million a week or something like that. But in Mexico in the 60s, when you bought comic books, you could buy your comic for cover price. After you read it, you could bring it back and get a credit for return it to buy more comics, get like a partial credit, and then the people would resell the used ones as used, and and so they were like they were getting read like 6 or 7 times, and so the numbers of like who was actually reading these El Santo comics back in the day is like staggering, and it's like 3 times a week. And they're a little smaller than an American comic, but not many of them are around now because like so many people, so many people
wear and
would,
tear,
sell them 6. Oh yeah, they're reading these like 6, 7 times, and so if you find like an old El Santo comic, they feel like they're on toilet paper. They're like just tissue paper thin. I have some. So Jorge Cruz, like literally, his name is bigger than El Santo's on the comic cover. He was a self promoter, if anything, and he did other, like Tinieblas and Solitario and like these other characters. He did other wrestlers. Like El Santo was just the most famous of them, anyway, he and El Santo have like a falling out, but whatever deal El Santo had with Cruz didn't preclude him from using the name, but it precluded him from using something about the likeness. And so there's a point at which Jorge Cruz is still putting out El Santo comics where he has like a El Santo doppelganger taking the photos and doing the poses now. And on his mask, he has like an S on the forehead, and El Santo is just a silver mask. So it's like, so I have some of the fake El Santo comics, and those cost me like a pretty good chunk of change, and those are like tissue thin. So, Cruz continued to do that for years and years. I don't know how or where that ever gets settled, but like, it was big business. And most of the stuff, at least from the kind of golden era of Lucha Libre comics, is that faux fumetti kind of like very specific to Mexico process of photos inserted into blank backgrounds that then get drawn on that have like, werewolves or vampires or whatever happening in them. And they were pretty fantastic. They were like the movies. They were pretty fantastical. They weren't like, it wasn't like storyline continuation. It wasn't like, I mean, he would wrestle in them. He would fight, bad guys, but it wasn't like my comic is about wrestling. It's about like in the ring, trying to get the belt back. They weren't necessarily those kind of storylines. They were more like, like gimmick storylines,
right? Like contained.
Yeah. I mean, they were, absolutely. I don't think they were quite, I don't think they were continuing storylines where like, there's this guy again, but, So, that's kind of what they were. Ooh, go ahead.
Well, I want to say, speaking about El Santo, I was flipping through I finished the main story of La Mano Del Destino, and I was flipping through the back matter, and you had mentioned, this being a love letter to El Santo, in addition to a lot of other things that you love, and admittedly, my Lucha Libre knowledge is zero. So I started just looking up on looking up El Santo on Google, and just, man, that was that was only just a shallow research I did prior to hopping on here, but just finding out what he meant to I guess safe to say like Mexican culture in general, and just like being the godfather of Lucha Libre. But I went on YouTube looking for some of his matches, and instead I found a few trailers for like some black and white movies, and one that just had me kind of cracking up was him versus some like Martian invaders who were also wrestlers, and that shit was just like was awesome. It was like just black and white, just straight to the point, just straight fun.
Oh, those movies are great, man. I highly recommend one of his first. So he starred in a couple movies initially where he's just kind of like a or he's like a bodyguard, or he's in the movie, but it's not the movies aren't about him. His first real starring role is him versus the Vampire Women, and that movie's great. Most of those runtime of those movies is padded out with actual like matches. Like they actually just will film a match. Like if him on the road, they'll just like use the footage of him fighting some jobber out in like some small town, insert it into the storyline. There's a couple like in El Santo versus the Zombies. There is a match that is part and parcel of the storyline, but more often than not, it's just like he's hunting down vampire women, and he like looks at his watch. He's like, "Oh, I gotta go to work," and then they'll just insert like a 20-minute scene of him having a wrestling match, and then back to the act. Oh, now I'm back to looking for vampire women.
Dude,
the one of the zombies though actually. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean everyone's got a job they got to do. So, so they're great, and they extend kind of the mythos of the character, outside the ring, and kind of like it speaks to their prowess as a strong man, a force to be reckoned with, and it all kind of builds the mythos of these guys. But yeah, El Santo is like he's the Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan, all like if someone knows Mexican wrestler, they know El Santo. If someone
well said.
So I mean those movies are great. Like there's I think he gets into the 80s. He's still making them, maybe the late 70s. There's one with him and Mil Mascaras and Blue Demon. Those are kind of the triumvirate of like great wrestlers, where they go. It's like them in the Bermuda Triangle. I forget the plot line of that, but there's some scenes of those guys just hanging out, and they're like the fucking coolest dudes ever. Just to see that, like they're just out of like poolside at a resort. There's like regular people, like girls in bikinis, like hanging out, and then these dudes come rocking up with their masks on and their casual wear, and I'm like, it's the fucking coolest thing on the planet, man. Like
that's
you cannot
badass.
tell me that's like nobody is unmoved by watching those guys walk into a scene. So yeah.
I think a few of the images that showed up in Google was of them three, like that holy trinity of Lucha Libre. And you're right. It was like, damn, I kind of want to be friends with them, but I know I'm not tough enough. I feel like they would fuck with me heavy, but yeah,
they're the manliest of men. Yeah,
damn right. And I just don't compare. But I was curious, like, have you ever did you ever attend any like Lucha Libre? Have you attended Lucha Libre matches?
Oh. Yeah, just modern stuff. I mean, obviously not as a kid. Like there weren't, there may or may not have been stuff happening in LA. There wasn't stuff happening in Orange County anyway, or at least where I was. I was more of a movie fan of the Lucha Libre, and like I would watch it like at my grandmother's house. I would watch the matches and stuff. But my grandmother, the one who I would watch TV at, like my mom's parents, she kind of didn't care for Lucha Libre. Like she kind of thought, like I would, like she's like, it's like dumb
Classic
stuff. Like
moms.
she kind of thought it was dumb. Yeah, exactly. And so I was more, but I could get away with watching the movies because there was more than just wrestling happening there. And it's in Spanish, so I can barely understand what's happening. But I was a big like WWF fan, like as I'm like 8 or 9 when like Hogan becomes champion and WWF goes national, and like the cartoon happens, and like I was a huge Piper fan and all of that stuff. So I ended up kind of being more of an American mark, and it wasn't until maybe like my 30s I was like kind of like, man, I got to get back into Mexican wrestling. And like I kind of I'd gotten out of even American wrestling. And I just had friends who were still into it, and they were talking about like some, Rey Mysterio and other guys, and like I'm like, oh, they like luchadors, and then I kind of just gently kind of like, I guess with more interest got back into Mexican wrestling, but I'm trying to think what I was watching. Like I started kind of thinking about drawing some luchadors, and so I was doing some research, and then I saw that there was a show in LA happening, and I was going to be in LA that weekend, and I was like, I gotta check that out. Like if it's still happening, I got to go see stuff. And so, I just went, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is incredible. Like I forgot how great this is. And so, I've never been to an American wrestling match. I've only been to Lucha Libre matches. But I have, there's like a lot of really good stuff. There's a couple shows in LA I check out. One of which is called Lucha Vavoom, which is burlesque and Lucha Libre, which is kind of fantastic. And then, it's great. If you can catch a Lucha Vavoom show, you definitely should. And then locally, there's just like literally there's parking lot shows that have some really great talent, and they're free. Like I can just go to a Food City on a Saturday night. They've got a ring set up, and if it's not too hot in Arizona, like you can hang out and have a good time, get some good food.
Cool.
And I got to say those parking lot shows and those like gymnasium shows are fantastic, man. Those guys put in the work. They're there to entertain. Everyone's giving it their all. No one's phoning it in. And I love those, and so there's a lot of like smaller like local talent guys that I really enjoy, and then there's some AAA guys, CMLL guys who will kind of do shows. They'll travel like kind of like regionally, like so I'll if I catch a show like here or Vegas or something, like I'll see some guys who are like bigger names. putting on shit for like $8. If I do have to pay to get into one of those shows, like I don't think I've ever paid more than like $20 at the most to get in, and I guarantee I'm having a better time than sitting in like the 82nd row at like a WWE show. So yeah,
I love me some. I love me. I love me some economical fun. So that sounds right up my alley. I went and seen my first. I went to my first kind of like major wrestling event earlier this year. Actually, I think it was this year. It was Monday Night Raw was here in town, and I went to go see that, and it was an experience, man. It brought me back to like my childhood and really being into wrestling and watching of my uncle and all that. So it was an experience, and I can only imagine what seeing a Luche Libre match would be like. I imagine way more like kind of like a party vibe and high energy.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and those guys always end up in the crowd and stuff too. So there's a lot of interactivity happening. Yep.
That's what I'm looking for. So okay, so I guess it's safe to assume, right? I feel like every wrestling fan I know has thought of this, and some of them normally have it ready to go to the hip to answer this question. But have you thought about what would be your wrestler name and your signature move if you ever enter? If you could be a wrestler?
I mean, it would, I'd probably have to just be Gonzo, right? Like, so.
I think that's you already kind of got a good. You're right. Yeah, you got a good default wrestling name already.
Yeah, I mean, I got my gimmick already. I'm trying to think what, like, so. I was a gymnast when I was a kid. Actually, for most of my childhood, I was a gymnast. So it would have to be something like super acrobatic, like a backflip off the top rope kind of finisher sort of thing. Like, definitely. Ooh, I was nice. Very good at the floor. I could do a lot of flips. I could do a lot of tucks, like back tucks sort of thing. So I'd have to do like maybe a double back tuck to like, kind of plancha sort of thing. So yeah, like something off the top rope, something backflippy. I don't know what I would call it, but it would definitely be that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I was thinking about this question myself, and that's pretty awesome. If I could do some flips, I definitely would incorporate it. But I got some skinny ass legs and bad ankles, so I need to figure something else out. So I think I'm going to play into the whole nationality kind of gimmick. And unfortunately, there's already a actual like UFC fighter by the name of the Moroccan Mauler. So I'm going to go with the Moroccan Mouthpiece to kind of play on the whole podcaster broadcaster thing. And I think my signature move would be like. Run with this. I think my signature move would be the ear explosion, like the ear explosion or some shit like that. Something with ear and explosion. And my move would be I take your ear and either I yell into it or I just like fucking like grandma style pinch your earlobe and some shit like that.
I'm into it, man. I like it.
Yeah. All right. Gonzo, let's get down to business, man. Thank you for sharing your background and getting me hype and interested in Lucha Libre and wanting to watch some Monday Night Raw tomorrow. You have got some big names backing your work. You've got, and co-signing your talent at that. You've got folks like Todd McFarlane, comic book legend, and you've also got a lengthy foreword in the trade paperback of La Mano Del Destino from Evan Dorkin. For those unfamiliar of who Evan Dorkin is, he is the creator of the Milk and Cheese comic book. He's also a TV writer for shows like Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, Batman Beyond. He's also worked on Ben 10 and a whole lot more. Gonzo, how's it feel to have like these kinds of cosigns and reassurance?
It feels great, man. Like it just feels very validating, I guess is kind of the, Yeah. I mean, Evan became a friend of mine because he just liked my work. Like he just saw what I was doing. He's like, oh shit, this looks cool. Didn't even realize that that's who he was for the longest time. We just talked a bit, and then when we walked away, the guy next to me was like, oh, how do you know Evan Dorkin? I'm like, oh, that's Evan Dorkin. Like I didn't even know that was it. But we just became friends at Heroes actually. That's where we first met, and then over the years we've hung out, we've had meals together, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I mean, it was just cool. It just feels good, like when people you appreciate your work. I don't know how to take it. I'm getting, again, with the image book kind of being out in the world and kind of doing its thing, there's like, I was just at San Diego and I kind of kept running into people who knew who I was and people whose work I absolutely knew. Like, just kind of names in comics where I'm like, shit, like, how do you even know who I am, dude? Like that doesn't seem possible. So to me, I kind of, because it seems so implausible and impossible, like I just kind of like, I'm like, oh, cool, and then it's not till later that I'm like, fuck, did that guy say you like my book? And I've had that happen with some, like I don't want to name drop, but that's happened with some huge names that like they have no business reading my comic book. Like, what are you doing, man? So that it's been incredibly gratifying, but it also is encouraging in a way that like, because before I'd like finished the series, like Evan was a fan and encouraging, and it's just like, well, if Evan Dorkin thinks it's quality, then I should keep going, right? Like it's kind of because being a comic artist, there's a lot of dark nights of the soul. You're when you're working on an 80-page book and you're on page like 57, and you're just like, fuck, like I don't, something has to motivate you, because it isn't until you're done that people get to enjoy it, but you still have to spend the time to do it all, and when you're kind of alone and in your head and isolated, it's hard to get any kind of perspective on if what you're doing has any merit or worth at all, and the feedback I've gotten has definitely at least somewhat convinced me that maybe I'm not crazy. Like, oh, maybe I do know what I'm doing here.
Look, dude, this book is evidence that a pro is doing this, man, and I'm glad that you're getting the validation from folks like Todd. You could stop at just Todd McFarlane itself, but when I saw the almost 2 pages forward by Evan Dorkin, I was like, no, the right people are taking a look at this and looking at this book and giving it its just due. So I'm happy for you. And I wanted to, on the topic of Image Comics, I wanted to ask, on the topic of Image Comics, we've primarily here on the show, we've been focused on celebrating 30 years of Image Comics. This year marks 30 years of Image Comics. Last episode, we dedicated it to Savage Dragon and Eric Larson. We've got another episode dropping next month about our favorite image writers. So I'd love to hear your opinion on the success of Image Comics and what the publisher means to a creator like you, and also someone that I imagine that you were there for, like the birth of Image, the heyday of McFarlane, Liefeld, and Lee and all of them. Like, what are some words that come to mind when you think of Image Comics?
I mean, empowering, I think, more than anything, because those were guys who just were making a lot of money for a lot of people and getting none of it, and and kind of being told that whatever they were being handed was more than enough, and that they should, maybe shut the fuck up and not complain about it. And I just like that they took control of their own destiny, and they're like, yeah, we might fail, but we also might succeed, but we're going to do it on our own terms. And that just kind of, it's shit. It's what I did with Lamano, I mean, like I shopped it around. I got past, everyone seemed to enjoy it, but no one thought they could sell it. So I just got, I got glowing rejection letters, which was great. People were like, it's fucking dope, but we can't, but at least taught me that there's an avenue to self-publish, to just do your own thing. Like, you don't need to, like you can bet on yourself, I guess, is kind of what I saw from those guys. And so if anything, that's what I've done in my career in comics, is just bet on myself. Even when I was told, by people that it was a crazy idea or that it wouldn't work. And I just had enough faith that there'd be enough audience to support it. And here I am. So, I got that from Image, and then just kind of that, comics could be more than what comics were. It's like every year Image does something that expands the kind of the idea of what comics can be, and I think that, in a day and age where I don't have to explain that, that I don't work for Marvel or DC, that's, it's just, people accept that now, that you're like, oh, you're a comic artist, and what do you do? And you don't have to be like, well, I don't do Superman or Spider-Man. Nowadays people just kind of have an idea that there is more to it. And I think a lot of that is kind of, predicated on the success of Image Comics and what those guys have done for the industry. So, definitely, I think more than anything, just empowerment. It just made me feel like I could do this, that I didn't need and I didn't need permission, I guess, is kind of the big lesson from Image, is that I think too many people in creative endeavors need a lot of permission, and in comics is there's no barrier to entry. You can just make comic books, and so that's that's what I got from those guys.
I love that word, empowerment. And you explained it so well. I also want to say that glowing rejection letters, it would make for a great band name, and those are the type of rejection letters that I want to get in my feature. All right, Gonzo, let's go ahead and really dive into La Mano Del Destino. I want to go ahead and read the solicitation that is up on the Image website, and then I want you to add anything else to it, because I'm sure that solicitation on the site and what's used, around on Amazon, et cetera, is probably normally written by a copywriter or someone on their team. So I want to know, how much does it differ from how you view the story and how you would sell it and describe it. So the solicitation goes something like this. La Mano Del Destino is set in the swanky 1960s Mexico, where Luche Libre is intrinsically woven into all aspects of society, and tells a tale of a once champion luchador who, after being betrayed by his friends and unmasked in the ring, agrees to a Faustian bargain with a mysterious promoter. He gains a new power in the identity of La Mano del Destino in order to exact revenge upon his betrayers. How's that sound? Would you add anything else to that?
So I actually wrote that. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Have we ever? Yeah.
I wish you would have hyped that up. Like, I don't know, man. That's probably some of the best copy I've ever heard in my life. Big shout outs to that.
No, it's cool.
Give him a raise.
Again, like with Image, Image will let you do as much or as little as you want or can do, right? They'll fill in what you can't do. So I was like, I wrote the solicitation. I'm like, here's what I've been selling it as, and they're like, okay, cool, we'll use that. So that's been, it's been cool. And then, I forgot what else I was going to say about that. Crap, I lost my train of thought on that. That was what I was going to say. Like, I don't know if we talked about this when you introduced me, but like, should point out that I do write and draw the comic. Like, I do everything on the comic. I'm a one-man show, so like, the entirety of it. Okay.
I've got it noted here that you are the complete auteur when it comes to this book. You did an excellent job on, I think, all moving parts of the comic making process, such as writing, penciling, inking, coloring. You've done, and even lettering. So you've done the what is it for 5? It's quad for 4. I forget what is 5.
Is that Quint?
Quint, yes, good job.
Yeah,
you are the Quint. The quintessential comic book master, and you've shown that skill here in this excellent project. And I was curious to find out from you. Well, I wanted to know from you, what is the most challenging and most rewarding part of the whole process? Was there one role that you really liked and one that maybe was a little more challenging?
Oh man, shoot. Well, here, let me wrap up the other question first too. So I wouldn't. So the only thing I didn't put in the solicit that I would add to the solicit is that it is it's Chicano ass comics, man. It's like it's done by a Chicano for Chicanos. Like it is brown on purpose. So like that's kind of my only thing that I and I stole that from
so much.
Oh yeah, I stole that from John Jennings. He says that, like, he's a black guy. I know. He's like, I'm black on purpose. Like, Jennings, he's won a bunch of Eisners and stuff. He's a great contributor to comics, like writes, draws. But he does, like, we used to do this convention that was all black and brown comic creators, and he used to say that, like, like the stuff he does is black on purpose, and so I say I'm brown on purpose. But anyway, as far as roles go, God, I'm trying to. I think I like writing more than I thought I would. Like, that was surprising. Like I just wanted to, I thought I was just an artist, like with a story to tell, and then I realized that with the story to tell means that I am actually a writer, like I'm writing the story. So I enjoyed that, and I enjoy being able to put in like things that are just there for my entertainment, like just dumb little background elements. Like I try to make myself like laugh, when I'm like just crack myself up with just dumb little shit that I'm putting in there, because I think comics should be kind of dumb, like it just. I think once they try to be smart, then they get really dumb. So I'm just trying to be dumb and hope that maybe it comes across as smart. Like, I just want to make, dumb, fun comics that are engaging more than anything. And also I want to, part of like the paper that I use and the way that I color the book and like all of that limited, like I want to give people an experience more than I just want to tell them a story. And I think a lot of comics, a lot of mainstream comics have just been about giving you a story, like here's what happens, and then there's a lot of that, and I want people to kind of have the experience of feeling the paper and smelling the ink on it, and then like seeing the colors and getting like a full experience more than just here's the things that have happened that I want you to know about. So I do enjoy the writing more than I thought I would. I hate the logistics of comic book creation, man. Like being the problem solver, being the guy who has to ship everything, the guy who has to address every envelope, the guy who has to go to press checks and all of that stuff. Like, man, like, and especially when there's problems, like with my Kickstarter, there was a lot of issues, and like, I just want people to do their fucking job when they said they were going to do their job. And I don't want to have to like chase people down. I don't want to have to like, send harassing emails. I don't want to have to talk to my lawyer. Like, I just want to make the comics. I don't want to be like the kind of business guy. And so the business end of it, like I'm terrible at, and admittedly so. Like I don't, I know people, like a lot of people will tell, like, will talk to me about like what I sell my stuff for, like price wise. And they're like, oh, you could make a lot more money. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, I just want to cover my costs. I'm not in this. Look, man, if I wanted to make a ton of money, I would not have gotten into comic books. Like that would not have been my career choice. I just, the business end of it and negotiating deals and talking to people and all of that. And I'm just, I'm just honest to a fault about it. Like whenever I've had to deal with like, agents or whatever, and I had at one point I kind of had competing agents, and I was just honest with both of them. I was like, hey, this guy's offering me X, Y, and Z, like, and I'm like, I got to say it's tempting because like this means this, that, and they're like, well, let me see what I can do, and then I would go to the first guy and I go, well, that guy's gonna see if he can't, just so that guy's gonna try to match your offer, just like I'm never trying to like scam anybody. I'm never trying to like pit anyone against each other. And when it comes to businessy stuff, like I'm just really honest about it. Like this is what I want to get out of these things. This is what I'm hoping to achieve. And then in hopes that people are just going to be that honest with me. And then sometimes they're not. And then that's the part that sucks, man. It's like, look, I'm being totally upfront. I'm trying to be as honest as I can with like all of these business expectations. So yeah, I guess the short answer is just the business shit, man. I can't. I hate. I wish I was successful enough to hire somebody just to handle that aspect, just to answer fucking emails. Like to be honest with you,
spoken like a true artist. That is that is a message and answer I've heard echoed among many artists I've had the opportunity to interview. Is they would rather just keep their head down, do the art, all that stuff, and forget about everything you said, like the logistics and the business side of it. So. Glad that you survived that experience.
Oh,
I think,
thank you.
Glad that we got this book into the world. And speaking about the comic, you've described this comic as a love letter to Luche Libre, your Latinx culture, Silver Age comics, and of course, El Santo, one of the greatest legends in Mexican sports. You said that it's everything you love about the comic book medium. And as a man who dabbles in a few artistic endeavors and fields, including graphic design and tattooing, what makes comic books such a special medium to you?
Because it is you're asking, so every comic exists uniquely in the person who's reading its head, because they have to fill in the space between the panels, and what they fill that space in with is their personal experience. And so you're asking the reader to co-author the comic with you always, because they're the ones who provide the sound, they're the ones who provide the movement, they're the ones who provide the things that aren't there. And comics is a medium of it's a reductive medium. I mean, like you're taking out things to make your message clearer, and you're asking the viewer to fill in those gaps that you've pared away in the service of effective storytelling or in the limitations of the medium. So I think that's what makes comics so unique, is that there's so many obstacles to kind of be overcome in it's a visual medium, but there's no movement, there's no sound, like those sorts of things, and there's no depth. Really, there's no parallax that creates the illusion of depth. So, those are the things I'm always trying to overcome with comics. Like they're still, so I try to add movement. They're silent, so I try to add some kind of sound. They're flat, so I try to add some depth. Like those are all the things that I kind of come after. And I also think that they're a bit of a magic trick, in that like when you go in to see a magician, it's a trick. But then you can still have your mind blown. And I think that once you tell someone, I'm going to trick you, and then you still do something they can't explain, it's even more impressive, because they knew you were going to trick them. And there's a quote I use. I think it's John Updike who said that all art carries with it the need to confess its artifice, right? Like to tell you that it is a curated, like made up thing. And I think that comics, just by nature of their format, confess their artifice, right? Like they're letting you know that it's a curated reality, that it's a made up thing. But I think, much like a magician might say, I'm going to show you a trick, so it's made up, it's not really magic, but then still do something that you can't explain is even more impressive and more engaging. And so most of what I do with comics is also a confession of artifice. Like I'm making you aware of the process in the product itself. Like I show the overprinting of the blacks, which is how 60s comics used to look. And it is partially trying to replicate the era of which the comic lives in and kind of like look like old comics, but it is also a confession of artifice. Like this is a product. This is a thing that's manufactured. And I think that allows it to live in a space that is free from comparison to reality or, fidelity to any kind of reality, and just allows it to live as allegory or metaphor, which I think has more impact than any kind of literal truth. So that is like my high-minded way of talking about my dumb wrestling book where guys mass beat on each other.
All right. I'm glad you, excellently said. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. Secondly, your joke that you just made about, this high-minded way of viewing this comic book where, if you were to really boil down the elements, it's wrestlers fighting, one another, and, this guy, well, sorry, wrestlers fighting one another, and really a tale of identity versus destiny, right? Like, I think at the core, you could drill it down to that.
Yeah, man, it is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. Well, I wanted to say that your approach, the way you wrote it, in regards to the dialogue, I thought added a very man. It elevated. Is what I'll say. It elevated that a very like boiled down a formula. I thought your writing and your dialogue was very poetic. Your vocabulary in this was like really verbose for the subject matter. I think I'm finally getting it together. Yeah, it was like really verbose for the subject matter, and I think it added a layer of sophistication that I wasn't expecting off the bat. But it added like a really welcomed and surprising level of sophistication to the drama and story. And I think it was like and you had like the right amount of flowery language to make a good juxtaposition to all the action and adrenaline being injected into my eyeballs, right? Like I went into it thinking like, oh, this is going to be a really fun comic book about wrestling. But what I got was like a very like, very honest, open, a very honest and introspective look into the culture behind wrestling. And I was curious to know, like, who are some of your favorite authors that inspire you and influence your work from a writing perspective? Because I won't be able to shut up about the writing in this book was really refreshing.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Well, I mean, that was all an attempt to kind of sound like Stan Lee wrote it in the '60s, right? Like just that kind of purple prose.
Okay.
But yeah,
I had him in my mind. Like reading through some of these, I was like, damn, like not only is he channeling like Jack Kirby art style with a lot of like these big bombastic figures and like, just kind of breaking the fourth wall in regards to like the action. I thought that the language reminded me a lot of like old school Stan Lee, just like being very like poetic and dramatic, when it came to his verbal storytelling.
Yeah, I mean it's all operatic tones, right? Like it's melodrama. Yes. I mean, and melodrama I think gets like kind of a short shrift, but I think that melodrama is part and parcel to the pageantry of Luche Libre, and it is kind of culturally significant to like my Chicano, like my Mexican culture. Like look at like telenovelas, like those are melodramatic, right? And there's just we are a culture of not only feeling our feelings, but over feeling our feelings. And I think that bombast of that works well in comic books, especially when talking about a subject that is bombastic. And I think that was the genius of Lee, is that he would take these kind of heady ideas and turn them into these like, faux operatic tones that kind of, again, no one talks like that. But I don't think it's any, but I think that in its unreality, it allows you to kind of focus on the emotional truth of it rather than get hung up on like the realism of it. And I think that, you look at, what's his name? God, I had his name and I just lost it. The guy who did The West Wing and the creator of that, like, nobody talks like that. It's obviously, or even Mamet, like those are guys who like, they have a tone and a banter to the way that, or like, Michael Mann, or those guys who like, they just, there's a cadence to the way that they write dialogue that is unreal, but somehow has more weight to it because of its unreality. And it was just, it was my attempt, or not my attempt, it was my purpose was to make it sound like a 60s comic first and foremost, because at the end of the day, I am taking, I'm appropriating and subverting white male super, power fantasy and making it about what it means to be like Chicano. And, in as much as my book is about like dudes and mass beating on each other, it is kind of my meditation on the internalized respectability politics of the Chicano diaspora. But first and foremost, it needs to be a fun comic that is engaging and dynamic. And so I took that tone to kind of both replicate the tone of an old 60s comic, but also in replicating it, kind of subverting it just by way of its subject matter. And again, man, it is just dudes and mass beating on each other. Like this is all so below the surface stuff. But I do enjoy the idea of taking this kind of like male superhero paragon, like, and just wrenching it over by use of color palette and subject matter and turning it into something that like lives in contrast to that other kind of 60s comic book. So yeah, man, I saw that as like a fun thing to try to do, but more than anything, I just wanted that sense of melodrama, because that's what wrestling is. Like when guys, if you're playing actual sports, if a boxer gets hurt, he's going to try to hide that he got hurt more than anything, right? He's going to make it seem like he's fine. In wrestling, if a dude takes a chair to the back, he's going to like arch his back over and like, reach out in pain and, roll on the ground and stomp his feet. And like, they have to sell the emotionality of it. And I think that much like in opera or even an old drama with like, the Greeks had dramas with masks on that over accentuated their emotion. I think that what is the word I'm looking for? That inflation of the emotionality is something that we as a species, as human beings, just appreciate. Like, I think that we just, when things are overwrought and melodramatic, I think that it tickles some primordial part of our being that we can then get past the quote unquote realism and just get to the emotional truth, because that's all I'm kind of like. I just want to elicit emotion from my viewer more than I want them to kind of think about things, like because when as a comic artist, you talk to a lot of young aspiring comic writers, a lot of comic artists, and I always let comic people who want to break into the business remember, like, nobody gives a shit about what you write, and nobody gives a shit about what you draw. What they give a shit about is how they feel about what you write and you draw. And so every word, every pose, every panel, every color choice should be in the service of eliciting the emotional truth of the moment. And everything I do is just to squeeze as much of that emotional truth out as possible. Because I think that a lot of maybe not great writers and a lot of not great artists, they kind of think that the truth of the moment is apparent, right? Like, oh, like, he said he's sad, so he's sad, like, or I made him frowning, so he's sad, obviously. But if it's like, no, man, you got to turn the dial up on that, because it's a 3x4 panel on a page that has 9 other panels on it. So, yeah, man, that's all kind of where that language came from. And also, it's just fucking fun, man. Like, you gotta write a sentence like the purveyor of Purloin Promises, like that, that just feels good to write it down. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Look, yeah. I'm going to be able to share plenty of art, and I'm going to get to the art here in a second, but I just wanted to share with you personally, just to give you your just dues and really flower home, or drive home the point of how awesome some of the writing in this is, and some of the vernacular. My favorite issue, I think this is issue 3 or 2. He ends up facing 3 guys at once, and then he gets jumped out of nowhere by the 3 Bellas. So the 3 Bellas show up in the ring. He's completely caught by surprise. They've got him on the ropes, like literally. He's about to lose the match and maybe even get unmasked. But then all of his female fans jump into the ring and help your boy out. They help La Mano out because they realize that, hey, this is not, this is unfair, and this is not how our guy's going to go down. And I just love how, first of all, this double-page spread of all the female fans holding our guy La Mano up, broken spirit, and just getting him back on his feet. But what you wrote here, like, I think is a prime example of eliciting a response, because this was one of those I just ended up reading it like 3-4 times and really taking time to like enjoy the art. But just a little sample for the listeners. Like I said, they're going to be able to see the art easy peasy, but I just want to share this here. You wrote, "My fans would not let their champion fall in this manner, without dignity or decorum, grace or gravitas. I used to believe that I was the master of their affections and adorations. I see now that I am the steward of their hopes, a hope that they would not let falter. And when faced with this, in the gathering brilliance of their hope, we see that all darkness yields to light." And that is the end of that particular issue. And then and it ends up beautiful because the 3 Bellas realize that, just moved by this act here, unmask themselves, which in Luche Libre is, the ultimate, I guess sign of respect. Yeah. I guess respect, and also, it means a lot. But excellent page there, man. And the comic book is filled with that, listeners. If you enjoy that, just that little sample, and I didn't really do it justice, I think. The comic book is filled with that. And now I want to get to the art. Because aside from excellent, vocabulary and great written words, the art, man, bombastic, and I'm once again so glad I bought this oversized trade because I think it needed the extra. What did you say? 7 by 11.
Yes.
7 by 11.
So it's like, yeah. It's only, it gains like a half inch. I mean, but it's just enough to feel bigger. Yeah.
Bro, it made a difference, right? The art is bombastic. There's a lot of energy. I mean, I think you really kept. It feels like you're in the wrestling ring, and some of these like full page spreads and double page spreads as well. I instantly get that energy of like that Jack Kirby energy where all the figures are exaggerated, but with like exaggerated, but you know that it's on purpose and meaningful. And then I also get like some Jim Steranko in there too when I'm looking at this art. But I feel like those are two obvious comparisons considering that you purposely wanted this to feel like a 60s comic book. So I'll also throw in a modern day reference, and that is if you're a fan, I feel like of Lee, I think he's Lee Bermejo.
Bermejo?
Is how you say his last name? Bermejo. Thank you so much, Bermejo.
Yeah.
I think some of your inking and textures remind me of him as well. Were you channeling any other artists, or were you channeling any? I'm sorry. Were you channeling any artists in particular when doing this?
Well, definitely Jack Kirby. You know, like I really. So I was trying to think. So when I was starting to do this, I don't know what art style I was drawing in, but I was just. Oh, you know what? I did like a single image of a luchador, and I just decided that he needed to look like the 60s. So I had like a very, and it wasn't even Le Mans, it was just a luchador I had done in like 2005, 2006. And I was like, oh, it'd be fun to kind of like draw him like in the 60s, because I had done a piece of art for my father for like his birthday. He's a big Green Lantern fan, so I drew this Hal Jordan Green Lantern, and I decided to draw it like a 60s comic, because I had just read the trade paperback or the hardback, or whatever omnibus edition of New Frontier, the Darwin Cook book.
Yeah.
And in the back of that, Cook talks about how he originally was going to draw the whole book like Jack Kirby. And so he had some sketches. There's some images where he takes like this bug image and turns it into Superman and other things, and like and it's Darwin Cook aping Jack Kirby but doing like superheroes. And so when I did that piece for my father, I was like, I want to try that 60s style, because I had a much different style back in like 2004 or 5. And but I was actually probably more influenced by like Lee Bermejo. I was doing a lot of like textured stuff. And so I wanted to kind of get away from that and just be like simple and graphic. Partially, like, you know, my career as a graphic designer, like I like graphic, you know, imagery, you know, and then partially like my career as a tattoo artist, like just having to reduce things sometimes down to a simpler form to make a better tattoo out of them. I always kind of like simplification over complication. And so I did that piece for my father, and then I did that piece, that luchador, and I drew him like in the 60s. And then when I started working on, like, you know, when I took those out as a portfolio piece, like people really responded to it. And then when I thought about like what I would do with that, because people like other, you know, editors and stuff were asking me what I was going to do with it, I kind of started thinking about the story I wanted to tell, and I realized that like if I'm going to tell a Luche Libre story, it needs to happen in the 60s, because, you know, like that to me is the heyday of the luchador. Like, you know, El Santo's making like, you know, 5 movies a year. Like those guys are like, you know, it's as popular as they ever were in Mexican culture, was like the 1960s. Not to say that they're not now, but they definitely were like at the heart of Mexican culture in the 60s in Mexico. So I was like, oh, I'll just set it in the 60s and I'll draw it like it's in the 60s too. And that's when I had that idea. So then I started researching guys like Ramita Sr., Jack Kirby, Alex Toth, you know, guys like that. And so, you know, I think, you know, because I love those old cartoons that Alex Toth did the art direction for, like the Herculoids and Space Ghost and, you know, Johnny Quest and like all of those, like I can spend an entire day just looking at character sheets that Alex Toth drew for cartoons. I mean, even stuff like the Galaxy Trio and what was the other one he did? He did some really ones that nobody's heard of, you know. And I love a Toth can work a lot of kind of like Alex Raymond-esque like flat black areas without getting as noodly as Alex Raymond. So yeah, I those are guys that, like, I think Toth, Kirby, Ramita, like I really, and again, talking about that Ramita house style, I really wanted it to look like a Marvel comic from like 1964. You know, just kind of like like I had Joe Romita over my shoulder telling me how to draw stuff, and me trying to do my best Jack Kirby impression. And I think the first couple of issues, at least the first one, I really kind of wanted it to have a little bit of that Fletcher Hanks kind of amateurism to it, like a little more wonky. But then I really real quickly decided, like maybe midway through issue 2, that kind of deliberate naivete wasn't fun to draw, and I don't think it was quite right. So then I kind of, as the issues go on, I get a little more polished with like my anatomy is a little less wonky. Because I always like Ditko too. Like Ditko's anatomy was always a little suspect. Like people kind of are a little more bendy than they should be. And I was kind of like leaning a little more like on that Ditko era, like Marvel style, where it's there's still a lot of like naivete to it because like the kind of language of Marvel hadn't really been sorted out yet. And then I just kind of put that aside because it was just more fun to straight up draw like Jack Kirby. So those were the guys I was really trying to kind of channel. But yeah, it's funny that you pulled that Bermejo out because I had been doing that style before I kind of leaned into this, and then real recently I've kind of been doing a little more textury stuff like Lee will do. But yeah, he's an influence of mine for sure. So I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely. That was even more than I was looking for, and I like it. I'm reading the back matter, and you dedicate maybe a lengthy amount of paragraphs to explaining that, prior to working on Mano Del Destino, that, you had been unhappy with the portrayals of Mexican culture and peoples in American pop culture. You had mentioned that, it was either a fetishization on violence by criminal organizations in Mexico, infatuation with the food, and if we're talking about, Luche Libre, that there was just a, kind of an injustice to portraying the essence of luchadors and Lucha Libre, outside of like just kind of, the high level stuff. How did you approach rectifying those discrepancies with, a Mexican portrayal in American pop culture in La Mano?
Oh man. So, I think the approach was really, it was one of, definitely color palette. Like I was so sick of seeing a sepia tone, dirty brown, piss filter on every time you see Mexico. Especially because like I just know the brilliance and the bright. I mean, like one of the things that I notice most about like Chicano culture is just like how bright it is. And every time you see it in an American movie, it's just so gross looking. So that was like that was step one, was just like get a Chicano color palette in there. And so there was that. And then I really, a lot of it was like you don't see Mexican heroes. You know what I mean? Like you never see like any Mexican being heroic. Like at best they're like a sidekick, but often they're just like villains. Like they're these the brutal cartels and stuff like that. So I really wanted to showcase a quintessentially Mexican hero, vis-a-vis a luchador, and like. But then I started really thinking about what it meant to be heroic, like what it means to be a hero or a champion, someone to be the champion of people, like to be their champion. And like that scene you talked about, like with the women in issue 3, like that's one of my favorite scenes because that's essentially where he wins, right? Like there's the rest of the book happens, but like he's dedicated, he is on a mission, but he's also these people's champion, and like what that means to be their champion isn't necessarily just being the biggest or strongest. It's about doing the right thing and what the right thing means. And so him realizing that he has it within him to get what he wants, but he doesn't have it in him to be the person who does that. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean he doesn't get to be who he is if he gets what he wants, and he has to make that decision. And so, that moment's very important to me. I really wanted to showcase that, like, and it is also kind of like me setting aside a kind of Western white ideal of what it means to be the hero. You know what I mean? Like we have, the idea of the kind of like, ego-driven, like rugged individual getting his way is kind of like, is what the Western, definition of hero can be. And that's not necessarily, doesn't really translate to like, not to my culture anyway. Like it's a little more about like who you can be there for and not what you can do. And that's what, so anyway, I just wanted to kind of like, at its core, I wanted to showcase something that was very much of my culture, that wasn't just a brown washing of some other white thing, because all too often when Marvel or DC or whoever wants to make some like diversity play, it's like, well, we just took this white ass character and made him black now, and now it's a black story. But it's like that is not true to the black experience. You know what I mean? Like Like just because you color swapped him, you did palette swap, doesn't mean that the ethos of the character matches. So I wanted the ethos of the character to be true, and quintessentially like Chicano, Mexican, Latinx. Like I wanted that to resonate more than more than anything. And I think that in having a hero that is quintessentially Mexican, like I get to celebrate the beauty of my culture, and that's something I've talked a lot about on a lot of other places. Forgive me even if this might even be in the back matter, but like, as a minority in America, we have to fight our fight. That's part of being a minority. You got to fight your fight, but we also have an obligation to express our beauty, because fighting our fight will afford us rights. Like eventually we'll get our rights, like in equality in that status, but expressing our beauty affords us dignity. And that's something that we need. As much as we need our rights, we need our dignity. And that's something we need to exemplify, like what we're fighting for. Like this is the thing we're trying to preserve. This is why it's important that we have our rights, because of this beauty that we have that is uniquely ours. And so I just wanted to express the beauty of my culture, like just the things that I love about it. And it's just silly dumb things like Luche Libre, you know what I mean? Like, it is a small hill to want to die on, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to sit there and take who has been presented to me, who I know to be heroes and the, the pinnacle of what heroism can be, of like a technical luchador, and to see Hollywood shit on that in various ways, and so I was just kind of done seeing that, like, this kind of bastardization of a thing that I hold dear. And I was gonna carry it with the love of something that I hold dear, and I think that a lot of what people respond to in the book is the reverence and love that I have for something like Lucha Libre, and so that was my approach to kind of pushing back, was just to not show how badass we are, or not show how cool we are, and not just to show how beautiful these things are, and I think that that's something that like a lot of people lose sight of. And yeah, man, I wasn't afraid to engage in beauty, and not worry about coolness or badassery, because that's being handled other places. I don't need to fucking worry about it.
Damn, Gonzo, you took me to church, man. That was excellently said, and I think yeah, I absolutely agree. The reverence that you have for Lucha Libre is handled with a lot of passion, a lot of love, a lot of dignity, and very respectfully, man. Like I said, it made me want to go look more into it. I kind of went into a short rabbit hole looking up El Santo and, some of the history of Lucha Libre. And hopefully, that applies to everyone that decides to check it out. I wanted to know, who are some other creators or bodies of work that are fighting the good fight when it comes to positive and accurate representation of Mexican or even like the larger Latinx culture?
I think that in comics, I think there's a guy named Rafael Navarro who does a book called Sonombulo, which is also about a luchador. I love that book. I love what Rafael does. God, man, there's so many people I know. Like, so I do like Latino Comics Expos and like Latino Comic Fest and stuff.
Oh, cool.
And like there's Caden Phoenix is doing a lot for not only female like or Latinx representation, but queer females, and like all like Caden Phoenix is doing a lot of really great work. God, I'm gonna miss, like, there's so many of my friends. I would just say, hey man, go to a Latino Comics Fest like webpage or something, look at all the exhibitors. Those guys are all doing great work. And then I think
I like that
kind
answer.
of
That's a hell of a good umbrella answer.
Yeah, and then in a broader sense too, I think like Jorge Gutierrez is doing a lot of really good work on TV, like animation wise. Like Maya and the Three was beautiful. God, yeah, I'm trying to think of anyone else who's making like good content, but I mean definitely Jorge Gutierrez is probably like my the most high visible. I mean, yeah, and if you dig Lamano, or if you dig what I'm talking about, just go on Netflix, watch Maya and the Three. It's everything that I love. It is traditional, but with some modern sensibilities. Like it definitely has like a Mexican ethos to it that is distinctly Mexican too. Like when you watch it, like there are story beats that you just wouldn't see in an American movie, and I it's I think it's like six episodes or something. It's not a big commitment, but yeah, that guy's really he's who I would want to be when I grow up. Is Jorge Gutierrez.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking up My and the Three right now, and I'm adding it to my list to watch. This looks rad.
It's
All right.
it's great, man. It's brilliant.
All right. Speaking about comic artists that you respect, one question that I love asking anytime that we have a comic artist grace to show is, what is your Mount Rushmore of comic artists? Right, like your top four. You don't need to have it in any particular order, but like if you had to build a Mount Rushmore of comic artists that mean the most to you, or maybe influence you, or you just really fucking love their work, who would be on that? Who would be on that?
Well, definitely Jack Kirby. Maybe he might be on there twice, but we'll just say Jack Kirby. John Romita Sr. Like, I love John Romita Sr., man. Like, I have a power record from like 1977 that I got that has a Romita Spider-Man cover.
I love it.
And it's literally, I can see it over there. It's like it's framed and on my wall.
Turn the page.
So that Marvel House style. What's that?
I said turn the page. Right. It's the the record and the book where you read it simultaneously together. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I collect power records, and so the story. I'm gonna try to do one with Lamano at some point. That's a whole other story.
Man, that's badass.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it happen. So Kirby, Romita, Toth, Alex Toth for sure. God, I'm trying to think who that fourth person would be. Probably someone like, probably Darwin Cook. That guy was just so clear in his vision, and he wrote and drew everything, and a lot of the work that he did, and his storytelling is just so concise. Like, those Parker books are fucking phenomenal, So that would be my Mount Rushmore.
That is a solid
Kirby, Romita, Toth, and Cook.
That is a solid Mount Rushmore. I mean, I would personally go pay and visit that as a one of them, like road trip landmarks for sure. That's a powerful lineup. Yeah. And then in regards to kind of thinking about like dream projects and things like that, who would be your dream writer to work with? Like, one writer that you would love to do art for, and then an artist that you would like to work with to bring your story to life.
Oh man, God, that's a question I haven't thought about. I don't know about writers. I'm trying to think if there's anyone I would love to work with writer-wise. I don't really read comics for writers, and most of the guys I like write and draw their own stuff, and it's part of like what I like about them. I mean, there might be some of those guys I'd love to poach to like. I mean, I got to have a lot of really good people do pinups in my comic, and then I've talked to some other guys about that.
Let's just focus on the artist side then.
Yeah, let me go artist first. Artist. Yeah, so I would love to. I love like Matt Lichnowsky. Like, I would love to see him draw some luchador stuff.
I had a chance to talk with him. I think last year, and the way that guy's brain works, it's incredible. But to see how his hands actually, take this idea that he's got in his head and bring it to life is amazing.
Yeah, that guy's great, and he's like him, and then I guess also like maybe someone like Michel Fife.
Oh
would
man,
be another guy.
He's awesome too.
Because they're two dudes like. So I was talking about someone at Heroes actually. I'm like, I like artist wise, I like guys who I don't know what they're gonna do. Because like right now, if you take I'd say about 90% of artists out there, I can be like, Pepe Larraz drawing Daredevil. Like in your head, you kind of know what that looks like, right?
That's a good trait. Yeah, like that's along his trajectory, right? Like he gets all the big books.
Yeah, or just even if like Pepe Larraz drawing Hellboy, you kind of know what that's going to be, right? Or even a guy like Mignola, if I go, Mignola drawing the Chipmunks, right? Like you kind of know what that's going to look like. Like you can extrapolate that in your head, but if I tell you I'm going to have Matt Lichnowsky draw Alvin and the Chipmunks, you have no fucking idea what that's going to be.
That's an acid trip.
It's going to be weird, and it's going to be fucking cool, right? Like, or if I say, I'm going to get Michel Fife to do DuckTales, like that's going to be fucking weird, but it's going to be great, right? So I love those guys who are just like, they're going to surprise me no matter what comes out of their head. Like, it's not going to be anything kind of like there's no like tick or trick to what they're doing so much that you can kind of like, oh, this guy uses heavy shadows or this guy does a lot of hatching, whatever. Like so many guys can kind of be summed up. I mean, me being such a Kirby acolyte, like if me drawing Cable, you kind of know what that's going to look like, right? Like I'm not putting myself in that kind of, but there are guys like Michel Fife, Matt Lichnowsky, guys like Matt Allison too. Like they're just dudes who like, if I ask them to draw anything of mine, I know it's not going to be what's in my head that comes back, but I'm going to fucking dig it. You know, and those are the people, like, that's all I want from, like, if I'm going to write something, an artist is going to do it, I want to be surprised, and I want to be anticipating, like when I'm writing a scene, I'm like, oh, I got to see what the fuck this guy's going to do with this.
Yeah.
And then just know that it's going to be totally different than what I had in my head, but totally blown away by it. So yeah, that's those guys. I mean, I would love to work with someone, I'd love to work with someone who had like a better sense of like noir storytelling, and I'd love to do like a noir book. Like I was pitching an idea actively with Brian Augustin before he had passed away, and it was very pulpy and very noir, and it was so out of my wheelhouse. It was going to be fucking great, and he unfortunately passed last year. Or maybe someone like like Howard Chaykin, like a guy who just has that kind of like real gritty, pulpy kind of but pulp in the true sense of the word, not just being miserable for miserable sake. Like a guy who definitely could examine the human condition in a way that I don't have my head around. So yeah, I'd say maybe like Jake can probably be up on that list of guys I would want to like. There's a dude who would write a script. Again, he would write a script that I would be unexpected to me. He would I'd be like, hey, let's do a story about X, Y, or Z. Like let's do whatever, like our take on Chinatown, and I know what he gives me back is not going to be what I thought it was going to be, and then I can enjoy myself. So yeah, that'd be my answer.
Those are solid answers. I'm really interested in seeing just a run of like childhood cartoons that I grew up on in a very like sick, twisted way by like Lesniewski and Fief. That would be rad. All right.
Yeah.
Gonzo, I almost skipped over the fact that Mano Del Destino is getting a volume 2, and that was recently.
Yes.
The campaign for that was recently accomplished. It was blown out of the water earlier this year. Admittedly, I'd missed out on that campaign, but I only met you in June, so I think I get a little bit of leeway. I will definitely be ready if you open it back up. But tell us about volume 2 of La Mano del Destino. When's it coming out? What's it going to be about?
When's it coming out is a big question. I got to finish the fucking thing, and I'm way behind. So I'm committed to it happening by the end of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, TBD, but definitely by the end of the year because I just need to be done with it. And I've been working. I'm chipping away. It's an 80-page book, so the kind of so moving forward. With Lamano in the position that we find himself at the end of Volume 1, we're picking right back up in that. It's the same world. It's the same stuff kind of happening to him, but now he is famous, right? He has a name now, so he's not the mysterious luchador who's shown up. He's people know who he is now, and he has a rabid fan base. So, of course, people are trying to exploit that, right? So, Hollywood comes a call in, or the movie industry. Those sorts of, so he's starting to do more things, right? He's starting to create more content that isn't just him in the ring wrestling. In the comic, we see that there's a cartoon about him. That's going to continue. I started making a newspaper strip on Instagram that once I broke my arm, I had to abandon for a while, but I'm coming back to it. But the newspaper strip that I put up is as different from Lamano in the comic book as the Spider-Man comic strip is to Spider-Man in the comic books. Like, it's sort of him, but it's not really him. Because some of the conflict that's going to start happening within the series is going to be him trying to reconcile his image that's being propagated by these other entities from who he really actually is. And so, like, in the comic strip, he has like 2 pet jaguars, and so people are like start asking like, "Oh, how are your pet jaguars?" He's like, "I don't have pet jaguars. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's the comic strip. That's not me." And so, like, he starts making movies, and people are going to start asking him about things, like, kind of attributes that he has from the movies, and be like, that was just a movie. That's not really me. And so, in issue 1 of series 2, it's an 80-page first issue. We're going to do 20 pages of him filming a movie. It's like him on set doing stuff, having conflicts, or he ends up getting kind of pulled into a favor for a studio head, and that ends up kind of unraveling on him. Yeah, it's a whole thing. It's the main conflict of the whole story. And then 20 pages into the issue, he's going to be like, "Oh, cool, I got to go to my movie premiere." And then we're going to have a 40-page comic book adaptation of a movie that he's made, which is a James Bond-esque spy thriller called Tangier Target. That we see that, and that's just metafiction. That's just him at the movies watching this movie. So we're going to read the whole story. Then it's going to cut back to him in the real world and continue that whole story. So then we're going to do issue 2 is going to come out, which is real world and him dealing with all of those problems. Between issue 2 and 3, we're going to do a sci-fi movie, another movie he made, which is a sci-fi story, which is going to be giant robot versus giant monster. It's Destino Bot versus Gamazotes. And then issue 3 will come out. And then between 3 and 4, we're going to do a surf movie. And that's going to be like very kind of Frankie and Annette, like 60s stuff. And then issue 4. So go ahead.
No, please continue. I'll save mine for last. Go, please.
Okay. I'll wrap it up. Yeah, let me wrap it up. So then 4 comes out, which is Real World. Then between 4 and 5 is going to be the movie that he's been making the entire series, which is the Jungle Adventure movie that he's been making. And then issue 5 will conclude the whole story. So it's going to be kind of almost every other issue is going to be a movie adaptation, but you're going to see in the movies, you're going to see some of the reasons why things are happening in the real world. People are going to like start reacting to, and he's going to constantly be having to reconcile this notion of him with who he actually is. So that's the plan. Issue 1's the only thing that's funded so far is Zoop. I'm going to try to continue to do these through them. I got to get the fucking thing done so that people can see that stuff is happening. But drawing an 80-page comic, one of which is real world and one of which is kind of metafiction, is been challenging. But I'm working on it. But I just want to, I want to delve into other genres that I don't have to shoehorn into my narrative. And I could he's a movie star, so he can just make movies, right? It's he can be my Many Lives of Waldo Kitty. I can just do whatever genre I want to take him on, and then it all does serve the narrative of him having to again, it's the idea of identity, like what happens, what happens to you as a person once you're no longer solely in control of your identity. So,
dude,
yep, that's that story.
This roadmap you've got is fucking bonkers, and I'm here for it. This sounds so
thanks, man.
Fun, man. Like, do you know what it reminds me of? And I'm giving this as a suggestion. Have you ever read the Radioactive Man comic books from published by Bongo Comics, done by Bill Morrison, the Simpsons character?
Yeah.
So
I read some of them back in like the 90s.
So the reason I bring that up is because those issues aren't very linear at all. Like, there's not a 1, 2, and 3. It's like issue 1, issue 30, issue 50, and every issue takes you through like a different time period, like the Golden Age, Silver Age. So you're kind of following like this pseudo continuity in history of Radioactive Man throughout like these different time periods. And I get that vibe with this roadmap that you're saying, where like you're just using different genre movies as the vehicle to put them in these different situations, time periods, and all that. And I think that is such a fresh approach at like continuity and telling story. Like, I'm hype. Like, please hurry up and finish the first. Hurry up and finish.
I'm working on it. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. So I guess. Are people going to be able to buy, like myself, be able to buy this 80-page giant when it gets done and everything, even with the campaign closed?
I think we're going to try to reopen the campaign because a lot of people have missed out. And then I think there will be some amount of overages where we'll be able to sell them, but it won't be nearly as robust as like my regular issues. Sure. But we might have to go to reprints, or maybe we'll run a separate campaign for pre-orders or something. Like that's above my pay grade. That's a logistics I don't want to deal with.
Fair enough. Hey, look.
Yeah.
I respect it. All right. Well, Gonzo,
I'm going to try to get it in as many hands as possible. So we'll make it happen.
I'm going to be on the lookout. Sign up for a newsletter or whatever you got. Gonzo, and as we start getting ready to wrap up, so that way you've got time to go work on this 80-page giant. I don't want to be the reason everyone's like, Badr, it's because this interview went on so fucking long. He couldn't finish a page a day. Yeah. I want to hear from you. Another one of my favorite questions we ask anyone working in the industry, because we have a lot of folks tuning in that are, aspiring comic creators themselves, and I always want to keep in mind our audience. If you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring comic creator that's listening right now, based on something you wish you would have known prior or early on in your career that would have made a world of difference or made your life a lot easier, what would that be?
My overall advice to aspiring comic artists is just make comics. Like, if you want to, even if you want to work for the big two, and you want like a job drawing Superman or whatever, you need to make indie comics so they can see you can make a comic book. So just make comics before you ever get in making comics for the big two. And if you want to just make indie comics, just make indie comics. So the answer to getting into comics is just make comics. Like, there is no way around it. And then the other bit of advice that I try to give people is like, don't wait to be inspired to sit at the artboard to start working. start working and know that inspiration will come.
Excellent. Those are really
Yeah, and that's a mistake a lot of amateurs make, is like you wait for the idea to come and then you're like, oh, I got to get to my artboard and start drawing. It's easier. Your brain knows, like, once you start making marks on paper, it's like, oh, we're doing this. Like, let's get the ideas generated now. So, start the physical motion of doing art, even if it's just stuff you're going to shit can. Like, just start doing the work, and then the ideas will come. Don't wait for the ideas to start doing the work.
excellent. Those are, I feel like, very straightforward piece of advice, but probably the only piece of advice someone like needing to like that one push really kind of needs. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I have no advice for like style or any of that stuff. Like, I can't be so many comics like are done in styles I don't appreciate, or I'm sure I do stuff that people don't appreciate. Like, there's nothing to be said for like draftsmanship, practice whatever, like try to work toward what you want it to look like, that sort of thing. All of that is is subjective as far as like what'll happen. I mean, make the thing you want to see, and if it doesn't look like what you wanted it to, make it again, make another thing. Like don't let your inability to stop you from practicing, right? Like you gotta there's only hours at the table is the only way you get better. So make a thing, it didn't quite work out, work on, move on the next thing, like all of that stuff. But the big thing is just like hours at the board. You got to put your time in. There's no shortcut to just hours at the drawing board. So get your hours in, start putting that pencil on paper. It'll only make you better. So if I heard somewhere that or this comedian guy I follow is like you get better at whatever you practice. So if you practice making excuses all the time, you're gonna get really good at making excuses all the time. If you practice drawing all the time, you'll get really good at drawing. Like there's no substitute for practice. So if your practice is coming up with reasons why you can't practice, you're going to get really good at coming up with reasons why you can't practice. So if you have a goal in mind, practice what that goal is, whatever you're going to, and be okay sucking for a while, like I don't, what is it I said the other day? Like, I don't love art because I draw well. I draw well because I love art, because all I do is think about and engage with art. So that engagement is what makes me good at it, not the other way around.
Great advice. Back to back to back. You gave me not one, not two. You gave me like 3, 4 pieces of good advice. So, listeners, you can all thank Gonzo, right, by picking up Mano Del Destino, giving him a follow on Instagram and Twitter. I know I'm going to be following. I'm going to make sure I'm following you on Instagram because I want to go read these comic strips that you said you put on Twitter.
Those are a separate account, but I'm going to post about them soon, so don't worry about it.
Hell yeah. Excellent,
I got you.
Excellent. All right, listeners, look, I'm sorry, Gonzo, I'm going to have plenty of links to your channels, to your Twitter, your Instagram, in the show notes, so people can just click on those to give you a follow, and I will highly encourage everyone listening to check those out. Give Gonzo a follow. Gonzo, would you like to plug or announce any upcoming projects or comics, or even just give any parting words to the listeners?
You know what, man? Like, I can't talk about anything. I'm trying to think if I can't talk about anything I'm going to be doing soon.
I love me a good
I am doing some
good
stuff.
Secret project.
Yeah, you know what? I am doing stuff that's not Lamano soon. I can't talk about any of it. So follow me on social media, and I'm really good about it. As soon as I can talk about stuff, I will talk about stuff. So follow me there. And then, I mean, I don't know. You just make comic books. If you want to make comic books, make comic books. That's all I got to say. That's my advice.
That's good words to live by. Gonzo, this has been fantastic. Like I said, you have created something epic with this Mano Del Destino. I cannot wait to see him in a surf movie. That is probably the one I'm most hype over. And I wish you best of luck, man. I know that you've got a bunch of conventions coming up. You are a working man's comic creator, and that's what I appreciate about you. Yeah, fantastic interview. Great chatting with you, and I'm so glad I met you at Heroes Con. Best of luck to everything you got going on, brother.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.